10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast, episode 93. Hey everybody, welcome back to episode 93 of the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast. If you are just joining us for the first time, welcome. We are so glad you're here. My name is Nick Manella. I am the creator and host of the show, and what we do is every single week on Friday, we send you a great, short, concise, right around 10-minute jazz lesson, complete with downloadable PDF, which you can find on our Patreon site. That's patreon.com/10-minute jazz lesson, or you can go to our website, 10minutejazzlesson.com. That's the number 10minutejazzlesson.com, and click on one of the Patreon links in order to find the PDFs for these episodes. Hey, just a reminder that we have a brand new video course out. It's called Standard Time. This is going to be a new thing that we're doing where we cover the jazz language through learning standards. Our first one is now available in our store. It's only $14.99, and if you sign up for our mailing list, which is available on our website, you can get 20% off of that already low price. That's just over $10 for a video course with over 11 videos and 6 pages of PDFs for you to get better at the great Duke Ellington Billy Strayhorn tune, Take the A Train. And we really explore some important parts of learning the jazz language, but through the vehicle of that tune. Very, very important tune, a tune that gets played a lot, a tune that gets called a lot on jam sessions and gigs. So if you're looking for something, a guided course of study, this is going to be it for you. Make sure you go to our website, click on the store tab, and you can download that course right from there. All right, let's jump into today's episode. So today we are going to do a part 2 on the dominant chord and kind of demystifying some of the things that we see in chord changes that can be confusing to a lot of us. So last week we went over some of the simpler dominant chords, the pure dominant. We talked about some of the extensions that you will actually see written on some of those dominant chords and how you can basically reduce all of them down to just a regular old 7th chord, even if you see a 9 or a 13 or something like that. And the other thing that we covered was the Lydian dominant. So that would be something like C7 sharp 11. If you've ever seen that chord symbol, which I'm betting that you have, it's one of the most common ones. We talked about that stuff last week. So if you haven't checked out episode 92, make sure you go and give that a peek, because you're going to want to cover that stuff before we get into the things we're going to talk about today, as we're going to get a little bit more complicated and talk about some of the more confusing dominant nomenclature problems that we'll come across and exactly how to play over those. So the first one I want to cover is something that I've done before. It was actually one of the first episodes of the 10-Minute Jazz Lesson Podcast, and it's all about diminished dominant. So how do we know when we're supposed to be playing diminished dominant? Well, it's actually very simple. There's a really simple notation that denotes diminished dominant, but you may not know of it, and you may get confused when you see it in terms of, all right, what do I actually do here, and what is actually implied when I see this simple chord notation. So that would be a flat 9 on the end of a dominant chord. The one that we're going to be using as an example is C7 flat 9. Now, this is absolutely one of the most common chord symbols that you will ever see as a jazz musician. These chords are constant. They're everywhere. We see flat 9 chords in tons of tunes from the real book. People are writing tunes with flat 9 chords all the time. And I think a lot of people, a lot of my students, just assume that that means only the 9th is flatted, right? So if you're in the key of C7, not the key of C7, but if you're looking at a chord symbol that says C7, you might just assume, okay, well, the only note that I have to change is I have to switch the D natural to a D flat. Unfortunately, I wish that were true, but it's not. It really implies a lot of other things that are going on, namely the diminished dominant scale. So, why do we call it diminished dominant? Because it literally is a diminished scale, just starting on a different note. Okay? So, if you were to take a C sharp diminished scale, and that would be a whole half scale. So whole steps followed by half steps all the way through. And you were to start that on the note C, you would get the diminished dominant scale. So that is why they call it the diminished dominant, because technically it is a mode of the diminished scale, right? It just starts a half step lower. So instead of doing whole half, we get half whole. Okay, and that requires us to use a lot of tension. When we play that half whole scale, we get a lot of those notes that are non-diatonic, a lot of those really, really interesting notes that jazz musicians love to use to create tension, especially over a 5 chord going to a 1 chord. That really is the greatest place to use some tension. So let's go over what that means. So if we take that half whole scale, we get C, D flat, E flat, E natural, then we get F sharp, G, A, B flat, and we're back on C. All right. So if you didn't catch it when I just said that, the tensions that are going to be involved in this are flat 9, sharp 9, and sharp 11. So those are 3 huge tensions that people love to use that will make your line sound really hip, for lack of a better term. Those tensions are really going to do a lot for your playing. And again, it's just that half whole scale. It's as simple as that. So let me start by playing the block chord with those extensions on top, and then we're going to talk about the scale. So I'm going to play the block chord first, and then you will hear me play the scale on piano so that you can get this sound in your ears a little bit. Here's the diminished dominant flat 9 dominant chord. So there's your diminished dominant, your flat 9 dominant chord. That's what it sounds like, both in a block chord voicing and a scale. Now, one interesting thing that you'll notice is that there is a sharp 9 in the scale, but we don't necessarily use that as an extension in our block chord. And the reason for that is what we're going to talk about next. If we put a sharp 9 in the voicing, we're actually changing the flavor of the chord to something different. So you won't hear many pianists or guitarists using that sharp 9 in their voicings if they're trying to achieve that diminished dominant sound, that flat 9 sound. Now, let's transition to probably one of the harder dominant chords, probably the hardest one, which is altered. So this is a completely different thing. There's actually only really one note difference in the scale, but it's going to be a completely different sound. So you will see this notated as C7 alt. You'll see that in several different real books or from composers or whatever they choose to do. Another thing that you'll see this written as C7 sharp 9. So a C7 sharp 9 chord symbol denotes altered. Another way you will see this written is C7 flat 13. So there's several different ways that this altered sound is conveyed to us through chord symbols, but they all mean exactly the same thing. They're all trying to tell us that we want to use an altered scale. The altered scale, while being intimidating at first, is really actually pretty easy to figure out if you know your melodic minor scales, because the altered scale is just the 7th mode of a melodic minor scale. So if you took a C sharp melodic minor scale and you started it on C, you would get that C altered scale. All right, so the tensions that are available to us on this are basically the same as the flat 9 chord, except that we're going to include the flat 13. And another interesting thing, when we play that seventh mode of the melodic minor scale, we actually omit the fifth of the C chord. So the notes of the scale are going to be 1, flat 9, sharp 9, 3, sharp 11, flat 13, 7, 1. And therefore, the available tensions to us are flat 9, sharp 11, and flat 13. So this definitely has the most amount of tension out of any of the stuff that we've covered. And really what we did was, over the past 2 episodes, we went from, the least amount of tension of plain Mixolydian mode to now working on the altered scale, which is obviously a lot more difficult. So let me play the block chord for you, and then I will play the scale just like I have done on the past 3 examples, and this will be the altered sound. So a very, very crunchy sound. Now, one note here, piano players and rhythm section players, they aren't going to play every single tension in every single voicing. I'm just doing that for illustrative purposes. Typically, you wouldn't play every single one of those because it just kind of makes it sound a little bit jumbled and kind of like a mess. I'm sure if I were a better piano player, I could figure out a way to fit all those tensions in. But typically, they'll play something like the sharp 9 or the flat 13, and that's really the only tension you need that is going to tell you that it's altered, because like we said, as soon as we change that 13 to a flat 13, really the only sound that we're going for is altered, because that's really the only scale that has that flat 13 in it. So it's a little bit confusing. It's a lot of, you need to do a lot of inferring to know this kind of stuff, which is one of the reasons that I'm making these episodes, to hopefully clear things up for you a little bit and let you know that, one simple little marking on a chord change can mean a whole lot of different stuff that not all of us are privy to at this point. Okay? So hopefully this helps. Make sure you send me any questions, 10minutejazzlesson@gmail.com. And please head over to our website, check out everything that's going on there. If you have 2 minutes and you want to go onto iTunes and leave us a rating and review, that's super important to the show. That helps people that are looking for stuff like this actually find it and gets us up on the charts a little bit. So thank you all so much for listening. Thank you all so much for supporting us. And we'll see you on Monday with the Motivation Monday podcast. Have a good one, everybody. Talk to you soon. Bye.